I'm Chuck Wagner, local resident, Shanksville area. We live about 3 miles from here. I'm retired, have 3 kids, 9 grandkids, and they're pretty much all local. So that's sort of where we come from, just local folks, local area, trying to be of help in some way to folks coming to the memorial. We sort of felt a calling, you might say, to become a part of it. Being local resident and seeing so many out-of-state plates on cars coming through the area, we knew the need was here. Once the memorial took shape, various different one of us took different areas of responsibility. I myself helped with maintenance. Sally on the end of here worked with Barbara Black and curator. She can tell you about that with tributes. And Donna Glessner, our mother, you might say, our organizer, took care of the ambassadors. But the need was here, and we were gifted with the desire to do it, the calling to do it, and we just found it very fulfilling through the years to be an active part in this, as it's transformed itself in so many ways through the years, beginning in such a simple way as you're seeing in the slideshow to what you're looking at today.
Well, I belong to this guy beside me. My name is Jane Wagner, and I've been around here for probably about 9 years, something like that, with the temporary memorial. A little bit later, I came back after I retired from Arbutus Park Manor in Johnstown. I'm an RN, and I've been retired for the last 4 years. So in the last 2 years, I decided it'd be a good idea to return, and I had a whole lot of things to learn about a new memorial. Through the years, we learned so much, because if you participated for 9 years, something like that, you certainly learned a whole lot of things that people would ask you, what you wanted to tell people. And it was always a privilege, that's one thing I would say, to talk to people. And sometimes you had to initiate the conversation, but a lot of times they were initiating to you in the early days because they came to find out, what had actually happened here. And so that was my beginning. And I will tell you, as a nurse, how I learned about the crash site so close our home, because I live in Shanksville and I travel back and forth to Johnstown. So that day, I was passing a TV set, and I heard, probably like many of you did, that there was a plane crash. But the plane crash was in Shanksville, and I say in jest here that I could not imagine that a little town of 200 people had a plane crash in it. And where would that be? Would it be in the middle of the town? Where would it be? And I had no idea, and probably still had very little idea till the end of the day when I drove home. And it was about 5 o'clock when I came home, and I was stopped by a volley of policemen that wondered where on earth I was going. Well, they thought I was, trying to, get into the crash site, but really I was just on my way home. So that was my beginning and a little bit about me.
My name is Sue Strom, and I got started in this just as the others did, by Donna Glessner, who went to the same church that Chuck, Jane, and I went to. And one Sunday in January of 2002, she made an announcement about whether there would be people who would be interested in being a volunteer at the crash site, that she felt there needed to be a human presence here since so many people were coming, and there was nobody to greet them, nobody to give them directions how to find anything around here. And so we stayed after church, and then on a very cold January day, we met out here at the crash site, and were given a little bit of information. We didn't know much. In fact, it was a little folder with 1 or 2 pages in it, and most of that was a list of the officials in case people wanted to get in contact with them, and a little map of where the crash site was so that we could point out to people how to get out of here, and where to find places to eat and where to get gasoline and those kinds of things. And so we began that in January of 2002, and we have been doing this for the 17 years since then.
Hi, I'm Sally Ware. I live seconds airtime over the crash site. I was home that day by myself. My husband was at work. It was just me and my dog. I saw what was happening on TV, and I couldn't believe when I felt the explosion. And we have a scanner. It said plane down Lambertsville area, and I knew right where that was because I had friends that lived over there. So my neighbors called me and said, Sally, we're going over to see what happened. I'm glad I didn't go. I stayed in the house. I've raised 3 children that all went to Shanksville School. Very nice community, very caring, very giving. Maybe about 240 people now. And I started out a little different than the other ones here. Every night I'd go out to a temporary memorial that was set up at along the Lambertsville Road. It was just hay bales, and people were leaving tributes of all kinds on those hay bales. I'd go out every evening to see what they left, and the one night I went out, there was a United Airlines flight attendant's uniform laying on the ground with some roses on it, and that really bothered me. I said, someone has to take care of this. Our weather's going to be changing. It's getting colder. It can't stay like this. A few days later, there was an ad in our local newspaper asking for volunteers to take care of the tributes. So I volunteered. So this coming October, I'll be here 18 years, and I became an ambassador with the rest of them officially that January in 2002. And it's always been an honor to be here, and I'm very humbled.
Well, from my recollection, I was more or less just concerned about day-to-day operation. I wasn't looking too far down the future because there were so many needs, and we sort of focused ourselves on what we could do individually, but we had no idea the path we would be traveling. It even took a while for the Park Service to come to town. So we were sort of on our own there for quite a while. We were glad to see them come because we didn't have any budget to work with, and to ask for donations. Excuse me. Eventually, as the temporary memorial grew, this replication on the side of the room, this is pretty much what you're looking at in the slides behind me. They tried to recreate what was there, and the large boards, we had 3 boards at a time on the fence. People could sign. There was a separate board for badges like for military or police badges that we would put on the center board, which was cleaned off 6 times. It took it completely down to bare plywood, and new badges would just automatically show up. But there was a need. I tried to help with the maintenance, like I said earlier. We would get flags donated. They would come into the curator, and I would try to figure a way to hang them above the memorial so the wind would blow them around without getting tangled up. And each one of them has a 9/11 theme to it, a lot of symbolism. And as those flags would wear out, I would contact the designer, and they were more than happy to replace them as time went on. But eventually the benches showed up. You'll see 2 benches over here. They were donated by a group called the Bruderhof down towards Farmington. It was a religious community. They had pretty much self-contained. They took care of their own needs, but their children chiseled the names of the passengers and crew members in the back of the benches. And before they did that, they always contacted the family, asking first for permission, then asking what name they would like on that bench. As you can see, Toshia Kuge, his mother asked for his name to be put in Japanese also. Debbie Walsh was just recognized as Debbie. So there was a lot of work, a lot of coordination behind the scenes, you might say. As time went on, the benches weathered through the years, and we would take the boards off, and several ladies offered to paint the benches, so we would take the boards off and deliver them and then put them back up again. So it just a group effort from, like I said, neighbors and friends who tried to keep the memorial going and keep it presentable, keep it safe, and to honor the 40 heroes.
Well, I guess for the 9 years that I was here, I probably kept thinking, well, pretty soon we'll be building something, or we'll be moving out of this temporary memorial stage. But it took a long time, and it really was up till 2009, I think it was, where we had that discussion a little bit ago. But whenever things began to change and the memorial place began to change also. Now that's where I was not in the building that was the end of my tenure here for a little while. And anyway, I would tell you, as I look back, we thought probably it was going to be coming a little sooner than it did. So that's the bottom line there. But for me, for Chuck and I, after, 2001, and it probably was about September the 12th, September the 12th, that the FBI left here. And, the food trucks left, everything left, and it was kind of a barren area. But Chuck and I would make our way out sometimes in the evenings, and what we saw out there then was the beginning of a chain link fence, the beginning of a fence with many tributes being left. And the strange thing that people just kept coming, and truly it was, you thought maybe you'd be alone, but 2001 early on, they were coming. There was a white cross there that was delivered by the men of the Alliance Church. We have a couple of Alliance people here today. And it was delivered then by those men, and there was a white drape around it. It was just another addition. And later on came a marker that was given. Can somebody tell me where that was? The Somerset Commissioners put that marker there. And I told them yesterday when we were talking that there was this time that somebody told me that if you dusted off the top of that marker and you kind of got on your tiptoes, if you were able to get up that high, that you would be able to have a good view of the flag on the fence that had been put there. And that flag appeared about November the 2nd of 2001. So. That's about all I can say right now. I'll just pass it on.
Well, to begin with, when I first chose to do this, was because I love history. And to me, this was history in the making. But soon, in meeting families and other people, I began to realize that this was truly an honor to be able to tell the story so that people wouldn't forget, and to be an ambassador for what these 40 people did. And so I have to tell you, the 17 years that I've been doing this seem to go in a flash. It's hard for me to think that I've been doing this long. Later on, I got involved with the oral history program. I was able to do, I would read the oral history, and then I would write a couple paragraphs about what was in there, so that when researchers read those oral histories, they can read that little couple paragraphs and decide whether this is something they want to use in the research they're doing, and if they want to read the whole thing. And some of those oral histories are 100 pages long, so that was one of the reasons why they need the little abstracts, so that people won't waste their research time reading something that they don't need. That was eye-opening too. Every time I did a family one, I would be crying the whole time I read it. I learned a lot about how the families felt about things that happened and situations with each family, and that just would rip your heart out. And so that, again, that adds to why I think it's important that I'm here doing what I do.
I think I can speak for all of us. It's been a life-changing experience. We never thought we'd be here. We always say we live in the middle of nowhere, but everybody finds us, so we're glad you do. So many memories through the years. I wish I would have kept a journal, but I didn't, because we were younger then, and now we kind of forget things that happened. But I collected tributes for a long time, and I never knew what we were going to find when we went out to pick them up. We were given disposable cameras and bags, put things in, pick them up when we thought they needed picked up according to the weather. Then we deliver them to Barbara Black in Shanksville. But some of the things we picked up was like a fishing pole, a bowling ball. People just wanted to leave something they had in their car. It didn't matter what it was. If they just had a diaper and they wanted to write on it to leave a message. So we never knew what we were going to find. It was such an interesting thing to be doing, and I'm so glad I was able to do it.
I think we all appreciated or were touched by our friendships with the family members that we've been privileged to meet through the years. Being most of them are either on the East Coast or West Coast because of the flight of the plane. Very few of them are from Baltimore or D.C. area, but we sort of became their hands and to do for them things that they couldn't do for themselves, like sending things to put on the angels. You'll see back in the corner, there are 40 slate angels at the site. You'll see pictures on the slides too. Each passenger and crew member had an angel, and it was a replication of their loved one, and lots of times they wanted something special put there, like a seashell or what? So it became an honor to do that. One family in particular lived in Hawaii, which we came in contact with and were unable to come to Shanksville. So we were instrumental in sending pictures and so they could sort of see what's here and experience the best that we could help them with. But there were special touching moments, personally one-on-one with family, that we become they appreciate so much what we do, which it's really been rewarding to help them in their grief. Sort of, I couldn't imagine losing a loved one in this scenario, but we just try to minister to them the best we can.
Early on, when it was probably some of the earlier programs that we had, it would be September the 11th, and I can remember, and there's a lot of pictures of this too, where they had this fence that all the visitors that came were standing behind the fence, and then this long, and now I'm going to get teary, this long line of cars and buses which brought the family members to the crash site. And it was one of those times that I really can't ever forget. It's kind of embedded in your mind when you see them come. I remember one time when Louis Nackey's mother, and I was standing very close to the temporary fence, and she just kind of collapsed there, and you know, because she was so overcome by the fact of the fence and the fact that her son had gone down on the plane. So that was two of them. Along the way, for an experience that I thought was very touching, that brought approximately 1,500 people to Somerset, was whenever the courthouse was draped, and I think some of you will remember this, it was draped with a large American flag. And there was like 1,500 people in front of us, and the Pittsburgh Steelers were there too, I have to tell you that. But the fact was that night, what they did, and it's become, I didn't realize so much till I talked about this yesterday, it become kind of a pattern for future times whenever they do the September 11th program. But that night they rang the courthouse bell, and every time they rang the courthouse bell, they lit a candle, and the candle was lit each time until all 40, they're really remembering each individual and each name that was called out for that toll of that bell. And that went through 40 times. And then they started to light little candles that went throughout the audience that was there. Never reached Chuck and I because we were way back and we never got a candle. But we certainly remember that experience as a wonderful experience. got to read one more that I had on my list as an experience that we had from somebody coming here. And I'll read this to you. If I find it, I'm going to read it to you. I lost it. Okay. Yes, this little lady was, from Arizona. So, I'm sorry. This old lady was from Arizona, and Chuck and I were there one night, and she came, and first of all, she's talking to Chuck, and then a little bit later, he brings her over to me, and he kind of introduces me to her. I can't remember her name, but right now, here we go. I got it again. Her name was Florence McGoldrick. Now, Florence probably looked rather about 70, 80-ish to me, something like that, whenever I first met her. And anyway, here's what she had done. She was from Arizona. She got on a plane. She took it to Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, she decided that she would rent a car and try to get up here to Flight 93. I always throw this in. There was no Waze then, no app for Waze. So somehow she found us, And Chuck and I happened to be there that night, and she come up and she told him the story, and then she told me. But the reason she came that night was because of these benches here. The bench had Debbie Welsh's name on it, and Debbie Welsh was this was Debbie Welsh's aunt. She wasn't going to be happy until she made it here to sit on the bench. That I guess that would be her niece. Had passed away, and she wanted to see the bench. So that was another memorable time.
We've talked about families and our relationship with them. My shift was generally Saturday afternoon. It was the 4 to 6 shift. It was the last one of the day. And very early on, Esther Heyman, who was the stepmother of Honor Elizabeth Wainio, would come every Saturday and sit on the bench and watch the sunset. And that was her way of dealing with her grief. And if you read the story of the phone call that Elizabeth made to her stepmother, in that, in order to help her deal with the fact that she might not live, Esther told her to look out the window and see the sky. And they would both be looking at the sky and know that they were in God's hands. And I think she came here. She never told me this, but I think she came here because it was the sky over where Elizabeth was laying.
Oh. Yes, we all have lots of memories. One of my memories has always been meeting the families, and they still come. I'm here every Wednesday afternoon. My first visitors last week were from Australia on holiday. So you never know who you're going to be talking to or who's ever in the crowd. One memory I have is the first time the families came to Shanksville to visit the site. They were coming on buses through the town of Shanksville, and we were asked to be on the streets. Well, being a small town of like 240 people, we lined the streets. And as they went by, we just put our hands on our hearts, and we all cried. Another memory is the first memorial service the following year. They released 40 doves, and those 40 doves did not leave. They circled and circled the whole time during the service, just like they were all with us.
Okay, I'll start it out because I do know that coal companies owned it. Was a strip mined area, so there were two main coal companies that really owned that area down there. It's about 2,200 acres. Okay, so and plus that we remember that there were 5 cabins in the woods that you never really got to see. Somebody told us just the other day they've never seen those cabins. And they are down there, and they are still down there, but they were also damaged by the crash. Chuck, did you want to add anything to that? Maybe you know a little bit more extensively.
Well, certainly before a strip mine, there were cows in the area. The important question. It was farmland. The Spangler family crossed the hill and a lot of it, but eventually the coal companies purchased it and stripped a couple times through the years because it kept on deeper and deeper. A lot of coal came out of here. It was a very productive site. The cabins she talked about were damaged somewhat from plane parts. So that was they were really in the debris field at the county corner set up. So that was properties were included within the boundaries of the national park to preserve. They're not accessible. They were purchased from the park from the families. So they're basically just in the woods and nobody uses them, but they've been stabilized and are still there.
Actually, it didn't take the government that long. We've been told that normally it's 50 to 100 years for a national memorial to be put together. Part of what took time here is because this had been stripped for coal, and so there were a lot of environmental issues. And then once those were taken care of, there were wetland issues. So all of that stuff had to go through all the processes. I learned a lot while we were going through this. It takes a long time to get everybody in the government to agree on something. Surprise, huh? And so there were all of these different steps that took maybe 18 months to 2 years until they were able to move on to the next step. So it seemed like a long time, 10 years until we got the first thing built. But in Park Service language, that was really fast.
Well, as I was a nurse at Arbutus Park Manor, as I had mentioned, I recall, and I mentioned also that on my drive home, the police were right along my way there, you know. I had a daughter that was working with me. She was my youngest daughter. And that day, she lives in very close proximity to the park here. So I would tell you that we were concerned about that, but at the same time, we didn't know where the plane had come down at. So as a matter of fact, that day the minute this happened, I believe the school began closing. So my oldest daughter managed to pick up her children, and my youngest daughter that was working with me already had babysitters, so it wasn't a problem, and we knew nothing that her house would have been involved whatsoever. And then a little bit later, as we're driving home now, by the time I get home, I find out that her house had been kind of minimally involved. I will say she didn't have extensive debris in her yard, but she did have a small amount of debris. There was, I often quote, 3,000 pounds of mail on the plane. So the air currents took that up, and the air currents dropped a few of those things in her yard too. So, and also the smell of jet fuel. That was one of those things that was about her house and about the whole area here. So when she came home, her husband was able to pick up the kids at the right time, and he already knew about the house just having debris in it. It wasn't a problem for them, and she told me the other day, just yesterday, I was talking to her, just to clarify that she was able to get in and out of the house as she wanted. But from that point onward, they did stay out of the house for about a period of 3 days before the little men in the white suits came along with the biohazard things, you know. They came along and they cleaned all of that up. Which way are we going?
Do you each want to answer that question, please?
The day of, I was at a seminar in Johnstown. I needed credits for certification, and I have. And there was a satellite hookup at Penn State. And of course, network broke into that satellite hookup with NBC, and we saw the second plane hit the towers. And we went for a break in the class, and I walked back the hallway, and one of the rooms heard the secretary said something about Shanksville. So it was enough for me. I grabbed my stuff and headed to the truck. Tried to get on 219, and of course then the schools were closing and the stores were closing. I couldn't get through. My brother-in-law happened to call me from New Jersey, see if we were okay. And at the end of his call, we lost all air signals. I couldn't make any cell phone calls. After that, the lines were just too busy. I managed to make it home around lunchtime, where I met my oldest daughter and her kids, and my youngest daughter's kids. Our oldest daughter got out of school, and we gave each other a good hug. And as far as coming to the crash site itself, I think that was the original question. I'll make a long answer, but at that time I worked for Camp Allegheny, which is a Methodist camp just over the ridge here, and we sort of supported the Salvation Army in their relief efforts here. And so I tried to help as far as carrying food, or we used our kitchen for food prep or washing kitchen utensils, whatnot. And one thing led to another, and long story, but through the end of that week I found myself at the crash site. A friend of mine had been hired to do the excavation of the crater, and I ran equipment there for a week. It was a very humbling time, but grateful for the experience, and made me appreciate the things I never did before, and grateful at the sacrifice of 40 amazing Americans.
I was working in Somerset that day, which is 13 miles in that direction. And we didn't have television in our department. All we had were radios. And someone's daughter called and said, you know, you got to listen to this. Something happened in New York. So we turned the radio on, and we're listening to the radio. We're hearing about the World Trade Center towers, and then we hear about the Pentagon. And then I get a telephone call from somebody saying, hey, a plane went down in Shanksville. So I called my father, who lived with me, because he was the only man I knew that didn't know where he was when Pearl Harbor was bombed or when JFK was assassinated. And I said to him, do you have the TV on? And he said, no. I said, well, turn it on, because something's happening in the United States, and something happened close here. And he said, I can't turn it on. And I said, why not? He said, I don't have any electricity. What he didn't tell me was that he experienced the sound of the explosion, which was loud, and the ground shaking like an earthquake. And he thought that the electric pole fell over on the house. So he went outside to look, and it was, that wasn't it. But he didn't tell me any of that. And so as I'm hearing where this plane went down, I'm thinking, oh man, this is close to where we live. So I told my dad, put the dog in the car and go to Camp Allegheny, because he was at one time the resident director there. Little did I know I was putting him closer to the crash site. If I'd left him at home, it would have been much better, I think, in the end. But that was my story for the day.
I think I said earlier that I was at home with my dog watching television, saw what was happening on television, and just scared, thinking, like, we're in the middle of nowhere. This couldn't happen here. And then a scanner came on, plane down Lambertsville area. I stayed in the house. My neighbors all came up here to see what had happened. I'm glad I stayed in. I didn't get to see the mushroom cloud that day. It was only lasted a few minutes after the plane crash. My daughter's a flight attendant for American Airlines. She'd only been working for a year, and I knew she was scheduled to fly out of D.C. at 1:30 that afternoon, but nobody else knew where she was. So everybody was trying to call me, and the phones were so tied up. But she was safe, and my son works at Hill Air Force Base, and he heard on CNN plane down close to Somerset County. So he's trying to get through to me to see where our Susan is. We had so many phone calls that day, and it was just a scary day. You didn't know what was going to happen next. And we just felt so helpless. We didn't know what to do. So the following week, we all cooked. We fed the firemen, we fed the FBI, the police, everybody that came to Shanksville. That was what we did. We fed them and took care of them. They delivered socks and chapsticks. When they came here, they had nothing on but their clothes on their back, and they stayed for several weeks. So it got very cold here in October. So it was an experience we'll never forget. My daughter came home and she did like a 2 a.m. run. They would take out hot coffee and soup to the state police that were on horseback circling the crash site. So it's just lots of memories through the years.
After the investigation was completed, they filled the crater in. As you see today, it was just level. Basically, it was a burial ground, and environmentally and out of respect, it was the correct thing to do. The boulder you see down there was taken sort of off the side of the hill as they were putting the crater, refilling the crater. They found that boulder, and I believe it was Paul Murdoch, the architect of design we're experiencing today, pinpointed that rock and chose that rock. Am I missing something, Sue?
Paul Murdoch, who won the design competition here, gave the families a list of things that they could choose to mark the site, because originally it was just to be a field of wildflowers, but everybody wants to know where the plane went in. And so he gave them this list of things that they could choose from, and they chose that boulder. So while it isn't actually from the field itself there, it is from the memorial itself. Does that answer your question? First of all, there were 4 men working for the coal company in the field, well, as you go down into the field. They were getting some land ready for replanting, and they witnessed a crash. They witnessed the plane coming overhead, turning upside down, and going into the ground. When the plane hit, it came in at 653 miles an hour. It came in upside down, but almost vertical into the ground. When it hit, it was tilted a little bit so that one wing hit before the other wing. The first thing to hit was the cockpit and the first passenger cabin and that one wing, and they essentially disintegrated, and that's where everybody was. The remaining 2/3 of the plane then buried itself as deep as 35 feet. Because this was stripped for coal, it's what we call soft ground, because it hadn't been compacted, and so the ground just covered up the plane, leaving that 30-foot wide by 15-foot deep crater. So what they found as they went through the tall grass that's down there, they found little pieces of plane, and they found enough of each individual that each family had ounces for private burial. Does that answer your question? And later, I mean, we recovered over 90% of the plane. I shouldn't say we, I didn't do any of that. But over 90% of the plane was recovered, and it was in the FBI's hands for all of this time until last spring, or this last spring, last June, okay, when they brought 4 containers of the plane, and at the request of the family, because they believed that there was DNA throughout all of that, of their loved ones, that it's buried on the site back behind where the crash site is itself. So, does that answer your question? Okay.